guys. Hey, I'm so glad to be here. Go ahead and let me know who's with me, who's here today. I know there's a lag that always kind of bums me out. Go ahead and post in the comments where you're joining from. Let me see who's joined. Hopefully we are streaming on LinkedIn and YouTube. So go ahead and let me know who's here in the comments. I'm so glad to be here. I feel like today, hey Clayton, I'm going to start answering what I think is one of the biggest questions I get all the time. You know, obviously I talk to a lot of anti-racism allies, and they're always asking for recommendations on resources. Somebody's saying they can't hear. Let me know if you guys can hear. Lots of people joining from, looks like LinkedIn mostly. But I get that question all the time. You know, what are your top recommendations? What should I be reading? What should I be watching? And I've come up with my top 10 list of things that we should be reading and consuming in order to enhance our racial literacy. And I'm saying our because I'm absolutely including myself in that. I'm on the same journey that you guys are on. So, oh, hey, Kristen, thanks for letting me know you can hear me. Talk to Kristen all the time on LinkedIn. Just so excited to see so many names that I know. I feel like I'm really getting to know you guys, and we're building a awesome community. So thank you so much for that. We see people joining from Oregon, people from Montreal, from all over. Definitely let us know where you're joining from. We'd love to see that. NYC. I tell you what, I am so wanting to get back to NYC after COVID. So really looking forward to making it there, Miss Jessica. So with that, let me just, Nairobi. Oh my gosh, awesome. So glad to see people from all over the world. So let me dive in. As always, I have way too much. I keep trying to say I want to get these shorter and shorter, but haven't been quite able to do that just yet. But I'm still working on that. So let me dive right in. So that's what I want to answer today. What I want to talk about is my top 10 list. And what I decided to do, because I am always so time challenged, is to just go ahead and break it out into 2 sessions. So today I'm going to give you 5 of my, ways to increase your racial literacy. And then don't miss us next time. Next time, I'm going to finish the list. So we'll talk about, actually, I added 3 prerequisites. So I'm going to talk about 3 prerequisites. Then I'm going to give you my top 5. And then I'm going to give you the next 5 during the next scheduled session, which is October 5th. So go ahead and mark your calendar right now for October 5th. Do not miss that one. And then this is a little bit of a change from what I told you guys last time. Last time I advertised this as our October 5th session, but actually I shouldn't have that date there. We're still planning to do this session, but I'm not 100% sure on the date. So this session is still coming up. So let's talk about my top 5 list. And as I was actually, believe it or not, jogging this morning, it occurred to me, and I'm writing this actually up as 2 articles that are going to appear on Forbes, so you can check those out when they come out as well. But I'm giving you guys the first look, the preview of the top 5. It occurred to me that there are a few mainstays that are not on this list, and they're not on the list because, one, they end up being on everybody's list, and I wanted to provide something different. But also, I'm assuming that most of us are kind of beyond that point, that we've consumed those. But it occurred to me, I shouldn't make that assumption. So I want to just start, before I even launch into my top 5, with my 3 absolute must reads. And I never say that because I feel like you're grown, I'm grown. I don't tell you what to read. I don't tell you what to do. I could offer ideas and recommendations, but I do feel so strongly about these 3. And let me know in the comments if you've read these. Okay, let me know what your thoughts are. So for me personally, if you truly are trying to live an anti-racist lifestyle, you believe in this work and you want to be a strong anti-racism ally, I just think that these three are just kind of must reads, and I'm putting them in this order for a specific way. In the last article, the one that I wrote on my Forbes page, and I posted also in the comments for this group, I wrote an article called, let me pull it up, Successful Racism Conversations Require 3 Ingredients. Unfortunately, most workplaces don't have them. And those 3 ingredients are racial literacy, racial humility, and racial stamina. And you get the racial stamina by doing the work on the racial literacy and the racial humility. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how to build that racial literacy. But the reason why I'm putting them in this order is my hope is that after you read the first 2, you've built enough stamina and enough understanding to consume that final one, how to be an anti-racist in a different way. Sometimes if you read that one right out the box, and that's the first thing you've ever read about racism, and that's the only work you've ever done, it might not, things might not set as well, or you may not be able to process it as well, or you may reject it to an extent because it might be different from your former way of thinking. But I think Letter from a Birmingham Jail is just the best thing I've ever read, period. I mean, not to mention on the topic of racism. If you have not read that, I would implore you to read Letter from a Birmingham Jail today, not tomorrow, today. Okay. Just Google Letter from a Birmingham Jail, King, PDF, and it will come up. It's not hard to find. I could do a whole session, and I probably will at some point do a whole session on Letter from a Birmingham Jail, because I think there's so much here. A lot of the things that we're talking about today, these resources are important from a historical perspective, just understanding history, just understanding facts and truth. But Letter from a Birmingham Jail is more than that. There's so many parallels between what he wrote in this letter and today, what's going on right now. For me, this Letter from a Birmingham Jail is speaking to why I'm doing these lives. This audience that he was talking to is my audience. It's you guys. It's mostly white moderates. It's mostly allies. It's people who are trying to do the right thing, who abhor racism, but they're not being as effective as they could be. So if you have not, again, read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, please do read it. And every time I read it, I get something new from it. Let me go back to the comments to see if anybody has comments on that. So people are telling me what they've read. Lots of people have read White Fragility, not surprised. Oh, let me put this up. Read Letter from Birmingham Jail every MLK Junior Day. Wonderful. I'd say read it more than that. Yes, I read it as a teenager. I live in Birmingham. So what I'm going to do, because I actually read it before I came on today, reread it. And for those who haven't been exposed to it, I just want to read you this paragraph. This paragraph is so profound, and there are so many parallels that I just want to take the time to share it with you. All right. He says, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who's more devoted to order than justice. Okay. Today, this is exactly where we are in our workplaces. We are struggling with this fight between comfort and progress. And I would argue that too often we choose comfort. Okay. So it's absolutely applicable for those people. I get into, people don't appreciate the fact that I have kind of a no nonsense attitude with racist comments on social media, or this is why I don't play footsie. I call it social media footsie. I don't play like social media footsie with people on social media. I believe in being respectful to everyone. So let me just say that out the bat. But I'm unapologetic and I'm unequivocal on the fact that I'm more devoted to justice than order. I'm more devoted to progress than comfort. For me, comfort is secondary. For me, order is secondary. Do I want comfort? Yes, I want it. Do I want order? Yes, I want it. But is that more important? No, it's not. It absolutely isn't. So for me, this is what is so animating for me. This is exactly what he is talking about. And this is exactly what is relevant in 2021. Let me continue. Who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. How often are we, and I'm going to put myself in there too. I'm not trying to say I'm high and mighty and I've always done the right thing, but how often are we doing that? Are we preferring a negative peace, which is the absence of tension? We don't want tension, okay? So we're preferring that and we're elevating that. Who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action. I could do a whole session just on that. Think back to the Black Lives Matters protests or demonstrations last summer. Think about the Black Lives, think about all that. What were they all talking about? What were a lot of people animated about? Oh, they were animated about the looting, or they don't like the demonstrations. Again, he says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but can't agree with your methods of direct action. We hear that today. Oh yeah, I agree with you about anti-racism, but I just don't, I just have a problem with the way. It's the way you're doing it. It's not what you're saying. I believe in that. It's just the way you're saying it. Let me know in the comments if you've heard that. Okay. Please let me know in the comments if you've heard that. It's not what you're saying, but it's just the way you're doing it. It's just, or I don't believe in protest. I don't believe in demonstrating. There's so much more there. Get this next section. Who paternalistically, and again, this is all talking about the white moderate. This is his frustration with the white moderate. Who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Now, this next sentence is exactly why we're here today. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute understanding from people of ill will. I couldn't say it any better than that. Okay, that's why we're here. We're all people of goodwill, but we don't. But many of us have that shallow understanding. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute understanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. So I just had to read it to you because it's just beauty on the page. I mean, it's not just eloquent, but it just cuts to the core of our real problems. And unfortunately, in today's discourse, I can't necessarily say that I hear people speaking that level of truth. And so that's why, I just had to read that. And it's not to, castigate or preach or come down on the white moderate any more than I would myself. If you didn't listen to my last session, please listen to it, because I spent a good bit of time talking about a time when I was racist. I spent time talking about a time when I was ableist. Okay, we're all in this journey. Okay, we're all on a journey. But part of what's going to help us be more effective is to be honest, is to take the rose-colored glasses off and be honest about where we are, what we're doing, but also what we're not doing and where we can be better. And so that's what I do want to applaud everybody who's here today, because everybody who's here today at least is saying, this is something that I'm interested in, and this is something that I'm willing to make some level of sacrifice for to improve myself. So everybody here is about self-improvement. So I see lots of positive comments. Well, many people have issues with John Lewis, if not now, when statements, lack of right now action. And you know what? We love this revisionist history with King. I listened to this morning as I was jogging, because I was listening to Radical King by Cornel West, and it's a compilation of a lot of his work. And people, we have this revisionist history when it comes to King. People love to talk about the nonviolence. And he was certainly nonviolent, but he believed in nonviolent direct action. That's the part they want to leave off. They want to just stop with the nonviolence. He wasn't just about nonviolence. He was about nonviolent direct action. Okay. He wasn't about being passive. He wasn't about waiting. He wasn't about, playing footsie and, coaxing people and making sure everybody feels okay and all that. He was about direct action. Okay. And that's what we need to be about. And that's what anti-racism, I would argue, is about. It's being active. It's not being passive. So with that, those are my three. You just got to read them. Okay. Letter from Birmingham Jail, White Fragility, and How to Be an Anti-Racist. Now, let me delve into my list. And please share. Some of you are sharing some of your must reads. My Grandmother's Hands is absolutely awesome. I talked about racial trauma, and I wish I didn't know about the book then, but of course I've read the book since, and it's amazing. It's on the New York bestsellers list right now. There are just tons of great works out there. So please, as we're going through today, please put your personal recommendations into the comments, because I want to include that as well. I want you guys to get as many resources as you possibly can. So with that, let me launch in. So this is my number one. Number one recommendation is watch Netflix's, there are two productions. One is called 13th. It's by Ava DuVernay. And the second one is Amend. I think the producers are Will Smith and Larry Wilmore. Just number one right off the bat. I'm speechless. These two are, in my view, the best thing that I've seen in terms of a theatrical production. You not only get high quality in terms of the information and the historical information, but the production value is just off the charts. I mean, I binged Amend, which is about the 14th Amendment. I binged that over a weekend, and I was sorry when it was over. Let me know in the comments if you've seen these two, because I want to put up some other comments. Yes. So yeah, she says 13th was mind-blowing. Many of you probably, before I started studying this and doing this work, I had no idea. I thought that slavery ended when slavery ended. I thought it ended with the 13th Amendment, right? They said it's abolished, but it didn't. Unfortunately, it did not. We know very well that after that, there was an exception. The 13th Amendment abolished it, except as punishment for a crime. And so clearly, that was exploited. That loophole was exploited. And then they came up with the black codes and all these ridiculous, rules that they only applied to black people. And it was just an intent to re-enslave black people. Up to 800,000 black people continued to be enslaved for nearly 80 years. So watch the 13th Amendment, and then they connect the dots because what happened at that point was they realized that there's a loophole here. So now we can just say that these people are prisoners and then enslave them because they're prisoners. Now, granted, a lot of these people hadn't really done anything. They created these ridiculous black codes saying, you could get enslaved for whistling at a white woman, or not proving that you were employed, or vagrancy, or if some random white person said, you did something. So, there was no sense of real justice. But these are just absolutely amazing. And it connects the dots between that period of convict leasing to the current period of mass incarceration. And one of the books I don't have on here is The New Jim Crow. If you haven't read The New Jim Crow, that's another one that you probably want to put on your list, because it just talks about the huge explosion of the prison population. In the 70s, I believe the prison population, the early 70s was about 300,000, but today it's well over 2 million. In fact, 13th starts with seeing former President Obama talk about the statistic that the US has only 5% of the world's population, but has 25% of the world's prisoners. So please watch 13th. My personal favorite is Amend the Fight for America. It is all about the 14th Amendment. And again, the 14th Amendment was sweeping, and the 14th Amendment is provided citizenship rights and equal protection laws. And I just want to pull out the specific clauses. So there was the citizenship clause, the due process clause, and the equal protection clause. So it essentially provided the rights that most Black people didn't get to fully appreciate, and not just Black people, Black and brown people get to fully appreciate for another 100 years, because they're the same rights that we were afforded in the Civil Rights Act of 64. And then, of course, the 15th Amendment provided voting rights, but then we had to have the Civil Rights Act of 1965 for most Black people to actually be able to realize those rights. And if that sounds crazy, it's like, well, wait a minute, if you supposedly got the rights, back in the 1860s, then why in the world was it not until the 1960s that you actually, that we actually were able to realize them? Watch Amend. Obviously, Jim Crow officially started in 1896. And so the Supreme Court came in and authorized separate but equal. But certainly we know that separate but equal was anything but equal. So I highly, highly recommend Amend. Dizzying array of artists, activists: Will Smith, Larry Wilmore, Brian Stevenson, Lena Waithe, Sterling K. Brown, Sherrilyn Ifill, Diane Lane, Pedro Pascal. So it's just, the best to me from a production perspective. The other thing I love about Amend is there's 6 parts. So the first 3 parts are primarily dealing with the history of African Americans in this country and the history of oppression related to the 14th Amendment. But then there's a section on LGBTQ rights, there's a section on immigrant rights, and then there's a section on gender equality. So I think that for those of you who are in the DEI space, it's just a jewel, because there's so much there. So we're getting shout outs for The New Jim Crow. I want to put this up, Color of Law. There's so many great resources. Color of Law is right over there. Amazing, amazing work. So let me, oh, sorry. I think now I'm commenting on, these are comments that you guys are making to each other. Okay, let me just keep going. So this is another person saying New Jim Crow is very enlightening. So number 2 on my list is, oh, where's my, hold on, I'm sorry. This is why I need a producer. I tell you what. So number 2 on my list, and this one involves some homework as well. I want you to take Harvard's implicit association test. There's the URL there, very easy to find. Let me know in the comments, 1, if you took the test, and 2, how were you assessed? This is a test that these Harvard psychologists came up with, where it only takes about 10 minutes online. If you haven't done it, please go ahead and do it. And it spits out an assessment of your perceived level of bias. And let me actually read. It's the subtitle, The Hidden Biases of Good People. So the whole pretext of the book is, hey, we're all good people. It's not about being a bad person, but it's, do you have these hidden biases? They, I think, call them mind bugs, if I remember. It's been like a year now since I read the book. But do you have kind of these hidden biases? And many of us have them. In fact, and they don't just look at race. If you look at the test, there are lots of different qualities that they can assess. There's even weight bias. There's weight bias, age bias, ableism, gender. There are tons and tons of biases out there. So I would absolutely say, if you have not taken that, please go ahead and take it. People are saying they have taken it. On my last session, I admitted that I took the test. So I'm just going to agree with Kathleen. So let me tell you what happened when I took it. So I took it. It concluded that I had a moderate preference for white. So as you can imagine, I wasn't thrilled with that. So I took it again. And then it said, I think I had kind of figured out the system a little bit. Then it said I had a slight preference for white. So I kind of, increased a little bit, but I was really interested in it. So I definitely wanted to read the book Blind Spot. And to me, this is so important and so helpful. The thing I love about it is it's scientific. It's not overtly a book about race. It really isn't. It's really about the science behind implicit bias. How did they develop the test? So as you read the book, that really starts to convince you, if you are cynical in any way, or maybe just aren't quite connecting the dots, to help you understand just logically how it makes sense. And I just want to share this really super briefly. This is one of, and the book has tons of activities throughout the entire book, but this is one that really, really was a light bulb moment for me. So in this activity, what they do is they have a list of words, and what you're supposed to do here on paper, you would just put a check mark, but on the actual test, you're supposed to hit either the F key, for example. I can't remember which keys it is, but one of the keys with your left hand and one key with your right hand. And so in the first time you do it, or in this first pass, what you're doing is they've got a grouping over here that says either it's a flower or it's a pleasant word. But the other option is you're asking yourself, is this word an insect or an unpleasant word? So you look at flea and you say, okay, oh, well, that's an insect. That one's going to go over here. Gentle. Oh, that's a pleasant word. That's going to go over here. So you're clicking on your keyboard to indicate, is it either a flower or a pleasant word, or is it an insect or an unpleasant word? Okay. Then at the end, they tally up how long did it take you and how many errors did you make. Then on the other side, now what they do is they flip the coupling. So now you click over here if it's an insect or a pleasant word. We're not used to coupling insects with pleasant. Our brain is used to coupling insect with unpleasant. And they've got the opposite over here. If it's a flower or an unpleasant word. So you basically go through the exact same thing you did, but guess what? At the end, when they look at how long it took you and how many errors you made, hopefully you can easily see why this one is probably going to take you a lot longer than this one. Why is it? Because our brain is already programmed to think of insects as negative. Our brain is already programmed to think of flowers as positive. So it's easier and more natural for us to make those connections. We can still do this, but we have to stop and think about it. And it takes a lot longer for most people. So that's just a little bit of a preview. A lot of people are putting the link up here. So if you have not taken that, please take that test. And I would implore you, it's not a very thick book. And I listen to everything on Audible. I don't read anything. So please check out. It's the authors of the test. I think they're both psychologists. One, I believe, is still at Harvard. One, I believe, is somewhere else. But Blind Spot, it is so, so, so good. And particularly if you find yourself maybe in debates with other people about implicit bias, I think this is one of those things that really can help you feel a lot more confident on that topic. So let me go back to my list. Okay, so this was my first recommendation, right? My second recommendation is taking that IAT test and reading Blind Spot, The Hidden Biases of Good People. Number 3, okay, this, you've got to agree, this is fun. I mean, watch Blackish because you can do all the study you want. There is so much that you're not going to understand about Black culture and how Black people and Black families, Black and brown, and I shouldn't even lump them together because within, brown is lumping in a whole lot. And so I'll just kind of stick to Black in this particular regard. Is different, is unique. And again, we're not a monolith. I can't speak for all Black people. I'm sure there are exceptions out there, but there's a reason why Blackish has been so popular. And I think in general, comedy works best when it's grounded in truth. And there are those fundamental differences. I mean, my husband and I have laughed so much because we just living our lives have noticed differences between how white people approach some things and how Black people approach some things. And we've kind of like hit our head against the wall because we see it the same, but we'll be talking to a white couple and they clearly see it completely differently. And then an episode of Blackish came on and they were talking about the exact same thing. And I'm not telling you exactly what it is because I don't want to out myself. I know what the white people I'm talking about are going to watch it and say something. But anyway, watch Blackish. It is so funny. When I write up the article for Forbes, I am going to include a link to one of the videos. There were so many to choose from, but the video I'm going to include a link to is when there's a little white girl in the elevator, like she's like 3 or something, and Dre doesn't want to go in the elevator because there's a little white girl in the elevator. And then he goes to his meeting and he starts telling his boss or somebody else, "Ooh, there was a little white girl in the elevator. She almost got me. I almost got arrested." And then these other Black guys come in and say, "Oh, I'm sorry I'm late, but there was a white girl in the elevator. I couldn't step in and I couldn't do anything." So it is hilarious. And I'm just, almost every day something happens that highlights to me how Black people oftentimes process things differently or see things through a different lens because we just have a different culture and a different background. Lynching was a real thing. I mean, Black people were lynched. Racial terror, violent terror is a real thing. Somebody said to me on LinkedIn the other day, this just happened the other day, and she was a white woman, and she said she was real frustrated because I guess Black clergy or the leadership in her church wasn't more animated about some of these race issues and wasn't doing more. And clearly, I can't really comment on it because I don't know the context. I don't know exactly what's going on. But part of what I said to her was, I said, it's not too surprising sometimes to see Black people maybe not being as forceful. And again, I'm not trying to talk about all Black people, but I'm saying instances of someone who's Black, who's in a leadership position, maybe not being as forceful or not as vocal. And I said to her, because Black people have learned over time to fear white people. They have very good reason to fear making white people angry. Okay. Historically, there have been dire consequences for making white people angry. Okay. And so I don't want to veer too far into this because this could be a whole topic in and of itself. But this whole concept of, Dre in the back of his mind was saying, I am not about to step on this elevator with this little white girl. This is not going to end well. This is not going to end well. So, if you haven't, so this is just something that I recommend occasionally when, white people ask me for suggestions. I tell them, hey, watch Blackish. You will learn so much about maybe what Black people are thinking, but they don't want to say, but tons and tons about real culture. Yes, it's real talk. It's exactly why I started this, was I feel like we need so much more real talk. Yes. And so somebody else made a really, really good comment. Yeah. In addition to the fear, there's so many African-American leaders who are exhausted. That is absolutely the truth. Yes. Let me just put this up. Our experience is different and the world sees us differently, if at all. I'm so glad that you put that if at all. When I did the session on microaggressions, I said my number one microaggression, and I don't see this talked about a lot, is when people treat me like I don't even exist. Is being in so many spaces where it is clear that I'm not even important enough to exist. I'm not even seen. I've had that happen to me, I mean, just countless times. So thank you for saying that. All right. So what is my next recommendation before I run out of time? Yes, let me put this up here. So many people talked about Isabel Wilkerson's masterful work. How many of you have read Caste? Who has read Caste? The Origins of Our Discontents. It's an Oprah Book Club Award recipient. Isabel Wilkerson is an amazing Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. If you have not read Caste, I highly, highly recommend. What she did for this work was she analyzed caste systems around the world. She looked at Nazi Germany. She looked at South Africa. She looked at India. And then, of course, looked at our own caste system, the system of white supremacy that's existed in this country for hundreds of years. And so it's an absolutely masterful work, not to be outdone by the predecessor, The Warmth of Other Suns. The Warmth of Other Suns. There are a few works that I feel I really connected with on an emotional level. And I would say The Warmth of Other Suns is absolutely one of those works. If you've read either of these, if you have comments about either of these works, please go ahead and put them up in the comments so I can let other people see. I think it's helpful when other people can see viewpoints beyond my own. But The Warmth of Other Suns is about the Great Migration, which of course happened in this country from about 1915 to about 1970. And I was born in 71. So for me, this book was almost like a love letter to my parents. This was my parents' generation. And again, why did the Great Migration happen? The Great Migration happened because Black people were fleeing racial terror in the South. Okay. They were being lynched. They were being terrorized. So they were seeking an ability, not that the North was the land of equality, because clearly it wasn't. And if you have any doubts about that, please read The Warmth of Other Suns. But they were, looking for possibility. They were looking for something better than what they had in the South, which again was just terror. So the estimate is about 6 million people migrated from about 1910 to about 1970. So over that 60-year period. And so what she does here, she interviewed over 1,000 people. I mean, she's just amazing. She interviewed over 1,000 people for this book. And she chronicles the story of 3 people in particular and their family. And I love to recommend The Worth of Other Sons, particularly to white people, because I think that one of the reasons, I mean, this is obvious, one of the reasons why in the workplace we kind of feel like we're talking apples and oranges and we're coming from completely different perspectives on this race thing is, to me, the analogy, it's almost like, think about if we all, 10 of us came together and we're assigned to develop a research paper about multiple sclerosis, or some, really difficult chronic disease. Now, half of the group has read a few articles about multiple sclerosis, but the other half of the group has lived with multiple sclerosis for 20 years. So it's almost like we can't even kind of have the same conversation. It's like, a preschooler working with a grad student trying to solve calculus problems. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. It's just, it's different. If you've lived this, if this is your experience, when I read this book, I couldn't relate to, things that were happening in the 1910s or 1920s, but I could relate to the fact that I remember as a child how terrified my grandfather was of white people. I can remember that anytime when I was a child, anybody, you don't have some things you don't have to say. I knew how afraid they were. I can remember that anytime I would tell him about anything that happened, he would always just turn around and look at me and he'd say, was it a colored or was it a white person? I know that fear. I'm 50 years old. I know that fear that he had. I know the fear that my mother had. Every time. It wasn't the exact same. I don't think my mother was thinking she was going to be lynched, but it was a Jim Crow fear. So now we had gone from lynching to Jim Crow. Okay. But it was still fear. So it's hard to read in certain places, but this is what most white people don't have. If you don't have Black people in your family, if you don't have aunts and uncles who are nail techs and managers at Applebee's when they should be lawyers and doctors, if you don't have grandparents who fought in the war but never got the GI Bill, if you don't have all of that background, then you just, you're never going to be able to relate, I think, to this topic the way we are. And I wouldn't expect you to. So that's why I love this book so much, because it's just amazing. So it does that so well. I'm almost out of time. I always do this to myself. So what is my last one? Let me put it up before I completely run out of time. Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, the Story of Success. Another reason why I recommend this, it's not overtly, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not overtly about race or racism. What it's about is busting this meritocracy myth, okay? Because when I think about where we are in the workplace today, in looking at this issue of racism, there's this underlying assumption that Black people haven't achieved as much. We're not as successful. We don't have the same wealth because there's something inherently wrong with us. Whether people want to admit that's their assumption, that's the assumption that a lot of people are making. Again, most people aren't going to say that. Most people aren't going to admit that. And a lot of Black people probably have that assumption. I love his work because, again, it's data driven. I love things that are data driven. I love things that are scientific. So what he did was he analyzed several outliers, people who had achieved extreme success. He looked at Bill Gates. He looked at the Beatles. He looked at he looked at a lawyer. He looked at all these different areas, people who had achieved this extreme success, and analyzed to say, well, did they do that all on their own, or was there something else that made them phenomenally successful? And so what he found was what seems like just ability on the surface isn't really just ability. There are three components. There's innate skill that you're born with, but then there's also significant opportunity, okay? And then the third element is distinct, unique advantage. And so he methodically goes through, he has about 5 or 6 different examples, and he goes through and explains why they were able to achieve the phenomenal, huge success that they have, and found it wasn't just their personal, innate, God-given skill. It was much more than that. And so obviously the corollary to that is when you don't have that advantage, when you don't have that unique opportunity, obviously that puts you at a significant disadvantage. So I absolutely love outliers. So I really, really want to thank you guys. Let me go back to the comments, just lots of positive comments. Thank you very much, Clayton. I'm just trying to do my part. Yes, John saying if meritocracy actually existed, then Black folks would be the power dominant majority in this country. No one ever worked harder than Black people. It is so true. I'm going to close just by sharing. There's a quote that I posted on LinkedIn earlier. And, you know, I feel like I've said this in my mind so many times that, you know, when people say to me, why do you get so animated? You know, why do you get so, you know, angry when you're talking about the history of racism and oppression in this country? I just wonder, why aren't you? You know, we should all be animated. We should all be passionate. We should all, if we believe in freedom, we believe in equality, we believe in justice. Anyone who believes in those things and knows the history of this country, the most loving thing we can do is expect it to live up to its ideals. And so that's what I feel like I try to do every day. So, you know, when they say, you know, why are you angry? I'd say, well, why aren't you angry? I think we all should be a little angry about that. So thank you guys. You were just such an awesome group. And I felt so much love for this from this community. So please join me back here. I do this every first and third Tuesday at noon. So if you enjoyed this, please share it when it comes out. And I'm going to finish this list. I'm going to give you my next 5. And I'm telling you, there's some amazing things on that list. So I'm going to give you my next 5 when we come back, which is in October 5th, when we come back on October 5th. So thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you. See you next time.